Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this very first press conference following the Foreign Affairs Council, for the first time chaired by High Representative Vice President Josep Borrell. The High Representative will present you a few elements about what has been discussed today, and we will have time for a few questions. High Representative, please. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon. I don't know exactly. Good afternoon. Well, today was the first Foreign Affairs Council that I chair. You know already that my work ahead will be guided by the three principles: realism, unity, and partnership. We need partners, we need to be united, and you need to act in the real world. So I want the support of the member state to give a fresh impulse to the Foreign Affairs Council. Our meetings must be the place where our collective efforts come together to promote a more effective EU foreign policy. And you have just finished a long discussion. It has been long but profitable. We exchanged our priorities, the work ahead, and how to better work together to achieve the objectives of the external action of the European Union on the basis of the letter that I sent to the ministers. I sent a letter to the Foreign Affairs ministers and another to the defense ministers, because I thought that it was better to send a letter than not to spend 3/4 of an hour with a long oral explanation. Today in the Council we have been dealing with current affairs, which, as you know, are the most pressing items on the international agenda. We have been dealing with the Memorandum of Understanding signed between Libya and Turkey. We discussed this, and it's very clear from our discussion that this document raises major concerns. We express our solidarity and our support to Greece and Cyprus, and we will continue doing that. You know that we already delivered a communication on that issue on, I think it was on last week, as soon as we knew about this agreement. On Libya, more specifically, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, Heiko Maas, has informed the Council about the Germans' plan for the Berlin process, which aims at finding a sustainable solution to the situation in Libya. I hope it will bear fruits, and I believe we should be able to do more on Libya. We certainly do more, because we cannot claim to be a geopolitical power or a geopolitical commission if we cannot solve problems in our immediate neighborhood. We also touch upon Ukraine and the Normandy 4 summit, which is taking place as we speak now in Paris. I think we have a positive momentum that needs to be used. It has been some improvement, some disengagement, and I hope that today's summit will be another step towards a sustainable and peaceful solution to the conflict. I personally raised Iran, because on Friday we had the meeting of the Joint Commission of the JCPOA, on Friday in Vienna, chaired by the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, which show that all participants stand behind the agreement and want to preserve it. This unanimous position is for us very important. All participants stand behind the agreement and want to preserve it. I highlighted on a note just after the meeting that to keep this agreement alive is a collective responsibility. But unless the recent trend on the nuclear side is not reversed, it will not be sustainable. But the European Union and all participants on the Friday meeting in Vienna are very much standing behind this agreement. Bolivia. Since the very beginning of the crisis, the European Union has been very active. We have been actively engaged. And I want to thank the European Union delegation and all embassies of the European Union member states for the work they have done. And we hope that the parties continue to show moderation and complete the transition and reconciliation process through holding elections. Bolivia, as you know, is part of a wider worrying situation in Latin America. On the last 5 years, it hasn't been any high-level meeting, summit between European Union and Latin American countries. I think this has to be corrected, and addressing this will be one of my priorities during my mandate. But the most important and most pressing priority for us today is the relations with Africa. In the agenda, this was one of the 2 items. And we started the work with the European Union foreign ministers to discuss on how do we want to shape our relationship with our African partners in order to prepare the 2020 European Union-African Union Summit. We need a comprehensive strategy with Africa. When Europeans think on Africa, they think on migration and demography, because they are watching images of people arriving to the European coast and people dying crossing the Mediterranean. For sure, migration is one of the most important issues we have to deal with African neighbors, but it's not the only one. And one thing is clear, we cannot have a strategy for Africa without Africa. This has to be something that responds to an ownership among Europeans, but mainly with the Africans. The visit of the President of the Commission to Addis Ababa this weekend sends a strong message on this direction. We have to reach out our African partners, and I've been asking foreign ministers to be fully engaged on this, a strong partnership on preparing this partnership agreement. We will have a college-to-college meeting with African Union Commission in February in 2020, as agreed by President Ursula von der Leyen. Then we will have an European Union-African Union ministerial meeting. And at the end of 2020, we'll have the summit in Brussels. So we have a clear path ahead of us for this important work. And the Council at his meeting during this week, I think it's on Thursday, will also send a clear signal giving a mandate to the Commission and to the High Representative to work on this comprehensive and shared strategy for Africa and with Africa. The second point in the agenda was human rights. This is an issue that remains a clear priority for the Europeans, and it will be during my mandate. And it's very timely to talk about it because tomorrow is the International Human Rights Day. And the important thing is that under the request of several member states, we have agreed to launch the preparatory work for a global sanctions regime to address serious human rights violations, which will be the European Union equivalent of the so-called Magnitsky Act of the United States. I was asked for this issue in my presentation in the Parliament last week, and today we have decided, it was a strong consensus about it, to launch the preparatory work, and the European External Action Service will prepare the documentation for this in order to prepare the equivalent of this act. This will be a tangible step reaffirming the European Union global lead on global human rights. Member States has also been informed, and they have showed a broad support for the new action plan on human rights and democracy that will be prepared by my services for the next 5 years. We will present the proposal early next year. As you know, this is a reference document on human rights in the world. It is a document of reference, and the new one will always continue being something unique on this kind worldwide. And in the lunch we have been talking about how to improve the working methods of the Foreign Affairs Council. We will continue working on that, but it's mainly content on the letter that I sent to the ministers to prepare the meeting.
Thank you very much. We will now take a few questions. I start with Noureddin, please.